What's going on, YouTube? Back with another video today, and today we are talking about the top 3 mistakes that you could be making in your backswing, which is costing you distance. Let's talk about it right now. One of the 3 big mistakes that you could be making in your backswing is breaking your wrist too early in your takeaway. There are a lot of amateur golfers that will set up to the ball and their first move off the golf ball is breaking your wrist. And then they rotate their whole body, but by this time your wrists have broken, you're rotating your body, and you are completely out of sync and out of sequence. We do not want that. On your backswing, we want to stay wide and to take it away more with our chest. Big chest turn on the takeaway, not break the wrists early and turn. You want it to be a 1-piece takeaway, not a 2-piece takeaway. This would be an example of a bad takeaway. Good example. All right. Now let me show you the difference so that we can put them side by side so that you can see both a bad takeaway and a good takeaway. Same setup to the golf ball, but this time it's going to be a big turn with the chest, bringing this golf club back. Here we go. So you can see on that one that I really extend backwards, have my chest turning off the ball, and my wrists don't break until a little bit later in the backswing, so it feels more like a 1-piece takeaway versus a hard turn and then a turn in a 2-piece takeaway. So having that 2-piece takeaway overcomplicates the golf swing. Essentially, you're not going to be in sequence, and when you're out of sequence, you have a lot of moving parts that need to line up together to actually hit the ball better. Not to mention, when you get very narrow with this takeaway, you could be throwing this club way inside, because a lot of people, when you break your wrist, the club goes inside. When you break your wrist, the clubs don't go, that's just not how it works. Your club's not going to go too steep or outside the golf ball. When you break your wrist, it's going to go around, and then when you turn, now all of a sudden you have a really flat swing and you're swinging around the golf ball. Typically your first move is going to be throwing it over the top to get it back on plane. We don't want that. But also, when you do flip your wrist right away, you're super narrow here. Whereas, look at the difference between the club head and you is very narrow versus super wide. That creates a bigger arc. Eventually your wrist will break some, but you've had this bigger arc, you've had more time for the club head to travel, and the more time and distance the club head can travel, the more speed it can have at the golf ball. So that's why it's costing you distance, and frankly, it's gonna end up costing you a lot of accuracy too. Now, if you hear anything in the background, we still have construction going on, but that's okay. The number 2 reason, or shall I say mistake, that is costing you distance in your backswing is swaying off of the ball versus shifting off of the golf ball. So we're talking about lower body now. It's very important that when we're talking about your lower body, we're talking about how it is moving in your backswing. So when I am saying swaying off of the golf ball, swaying is essentially when your right hip starts traveling over this right foot. If I have a very narrow stance, it'll be really easy to demonstrate, because as I turn back, my hip will start going this way. It helps you to have a bigger backswing, but once this hip gets outside of this right leg, you have to bring your hip all the way back to the golf ball to actually be able to use your lower body and your leg, and there's a lot more moving parts. You lose a lot of force that you can generate by this bringing it back and then turning, versus shifting off of the golf ball, which shifting is when you load your actual right leg, and you can see my hip is still inside of my foot, and all of my force is on this right quad, and also sitting right back in my right glute. It's the exact opposite for lefties, but that move right there will help you to stay in contact with the ground, feel great use of your legs, and then at your top of your swing, when you transfer weight, it's a direct transfer and utilize the ground, versus you're off the ball, you really aren't loaded into your right side, you swayed off of it, now you have to bring it all the way back, and then it's too late to actually use the ground. You can't optimally do that. So here's what those two swings look like in fast motion. Somebody who sways is gonna look more like this. That was a really great swing. Whereas somebody who shifts is gonna be a little bit more compact with the right leg, turn and load. Much better use of my legs there. We can put them side by side. You can see on that shifting one, I'm really just turning off this ball. This gets outside and I lose all feel for anything going on down in this region over here. Whereas when I am actually shifting off the golf ball, you can still see my head slides back behind the golf ball, but that's because I am loaded super hard into my quad and my glute. I feel so much contact with the ground and my lower body, and then I can transfer the weight and go. Now, the third mistake that people make in their backswing, which is costing you distance and accuracy, is your wrists. Yes, we have not talked about wrists yet on this channel, but your wrists play a massive role in both accuracy and distance. And why I am bringing that up is because there are coaches that say you must have a straight wrist. There are coaches that say you must have a bowed wrist. And pretty much every coach says you cannot cup your wrists and be a good golfer, an accurate golfer, or hit the ball far. Well, I cup my wrists, so they're completely wrong. But I do understand where they're coming from for the most part. Here's what they fail to take into account. They fail to take into account that every person is different. I physically cannot bow my wrists. If I bow my wrists on that backswing, I am about to drop the club right now. I have absolutely no control of this, nor any power, and just have a complete numbness and weak feeling right here and up into my forearm. So when everybody online or golf coaches have told me you need to do this to be a better golfer and hit the ball further and to hit it straighter, I can't. I'm sorry. That's not who I am. And a lot of you guys are trying to bow your wrists and you're failing, and it's making you a worse golfer because your body cannot physically do it correctly well, and you'd be better off just having a neutral wrist. So quickly talk about it on the backswing. A bowed wrist closes the club face. My cameraman silently sneezing over there. So a bowed wrist is gonna close the club face, which is why, would you knock it off in your allergies? Let's try this again, shall we? A bowed wrist naturally closes the club face. You can see that a neutral wrist here, bowed wrist closes the club face, and a cupped wrist opens the club face. One thing to keep in mind is that you have to pair your grip with what type of wrist golfer you are. If you are a bowed wrist golfer, since you are a bowed wrist golfer and your bowed wrist naturally closes the club face, you can have a weaker grip. If you have a cupped club face, you have to have a stronger grip because your cupped wrist is opening up the club face. If you have a neutral wrist, which ideally is the best position to be in, just frankly, there's a lot less moving parts and a lot of less things that can go wrong. Again, that's not who I am, but that's who a lot of you guys should strive to become if that feels right and natural for you. You can afford to have more neutral of a grip. So, with all of that being said, I want you guys to pay attention to what type of wrist golfer you are. Try to be in some other positions and see if it feels more natural. See if you have the strength to do it. There are guys who hit the golf ball very far with a super cupped wrist. Hey, I'm Sam, nice to meet you. And there are golfers that hit the ball really, really far with a bowed wrist. I mean, just look at Dustin Johnson. He hits the ball really far and he has a super bowed wrist, but he's also an exception. So I don't want you guys to just automatically assume that one type of wrist position is the best while one is the worst. It really just depends on you. So in your backswing, practice some of the different types. Practice a bowed wrist, practice a neutral wrist, practice a cupped wrist. Okay, probably not practice a cupped wrist. If you already are a cupped golfer, you probably know it. But see what type of wrist position you are. Match up your grip to your wrist position And that can help lead you to being a better golfer and hitting the ball a lot further. So if you're trying to change your wrist position and you are really, really struggling, maybe look at a different part of your swing before automatically changing that because somebody online told you that you need to. At the end of the day, there are 3 things I want you to focus on to look in your backswing to see how you can improve it. The first is paying attention to your actual takeaway, making sure you don't break your wrist too early and trying to get a little bit more width in your backswing, bringing that club more backwards versus breaking the wrist and turning around your body. The second thing I want you to pay attention to is actually if you are shifting or swaying off the golf ball. This is imperative to if you're actually using your lower body and also timing your lower body to be more accurate. And the third is making sure that you know what type of golfer you are and which type of wrist position you should be in. If you are trying to mess with your wrists, make sure you understand why and if you biomechanically can actually do it. There are a couple of tests to see if you actually can be in different wrist positions and which wrist position you should actually be in. If you're interested in seeing that video, let me know in the comments down below. We can make a whole video on wrists, a whole wrist video for you guys. Let me know in the comments if you want to know that so that you can determine exactly which type of wrist golfer you are. Pay attention to your backswing. The backswing is one of the most important things to actually having a good swing because the second you start your backswing, you can throw everything off of the rails and that will lead to a poor swing. I don't care what you do in the rest of your swing. Start paying attention to your backswing. That's it for today. And until next time, we'll see you guys later.